In this lessons episode, discover how precise growth forecasting shapes scalable business strategies. Learn why effective organizational structure and talent management are critical to sustaining rapid growth, and understand how strategic hires and clear communication transform cultural challenges into long-term success. You mentioned a few things there. So you mentioned, like, is it scalable, and you forecast it out, and the economics made sense, obviously, and you were working with these people for 2 months, so you knew the people you were working with as well. But one thing is interesting. So you modeled it out, and I'm assuming like regular forecasts, you figure out TAM, and you do all the things you'd figure out for a regular model. But how do you scale at that? What's the playbook to scale at that velocity when you've never done it yourself before? How do you forecast out a model? Because this is still early days. Like, now DigitalOcean competes with like AWS, and it's like now it competes at that level. But when you're building out a competitor to AWS, I don't know how you would model out a similar growth trajectory when there's nothing else out there that has really achieved that scale before.
Yeah. Depends on the stage of the business. So again, we do two different types of investment. We'll invest in our core deals that actually have validation, which means they have data, they have history. And in those situations, which is probably, we were in the earlier stages of that at DigitalOcean when I started working, but I could see it in real time. Like, I could see patterns being created. You recognize the patterns, where are you sourcing your customers from? How much of it is organic? How can you drive those, organic channels? And ultimately, all a model is a set of assumptions, a set of growth assumptions. So if you just have an understanding of, every customer I bring in, for every one customer I bring in, I'm going to get 0.1 referral, or whatever that number is. For every customer that comes in, this is the average price they're going to start spending. This is the growth rate of that spend over time based upon what I've seen and what I've experienced. And you start kind of just putting those little pieces together. In some companies where they have, market growth strategies, and they're like market by market, you look at what's the trend of a market launch, and then how can you layer new markets on top to see how that grows over time. So there's just different mechanisms. You just got to be creative from a perspective of how you imagine the business is going to grow, and translate that into a set of assumptions that drive the numbers. And then you just roll the numbers out. And so it's ironic, you could get one assumption wrong and your numbers will be way off. Ironically, with DigitalOcean, for the first 3 years of business, we hit our number literally within 1 or 2%. I don't know how it happened. Wasn't so easy.
Very impressive.
But years 1 through 3, it was so spot on. It was incredible. And so it's just, I guess I was lucky that in that business specifically, those assumptions were really obvious, were really clear, for me at least. And so documenting those and building a model against them turned out to be very, very real. It's always difficult in new businesses where you've never done it before, but it's an art as much as it is a skill. Like, you have to actually build the ability to kind of predict what's going to happen, how customers are going to react, and what those assumptions are that are going to drive your business. But I will say, from an investment standpoint, when I look at somebody's model, I'm more focused on how they're thinking than what the model's telling me, because I understand that a model could be way off and they could be completely wrong. But if you actually look at the numbers and look at the assumptions and you say, okay, so this is how you see your business. You think these are the key drivers. You think these are the things going to affect your business. It allows me to understand the entrepreneur better. And for me, the question is this person thinking about the business correctly? Like, do they have the right head on their shoulders to think correctly, iterate and adjust those assumptions as needed, build a real kind of business and got to feed into the true assumptions that are going to really drive that business.
So walk me through like some of the, because I want to understand some of the things that M13 is working on now with organizations, but walk me through some of like, pick a few key lessons as you grew DigitalOcean, because that was the largest organization that you were an operator in. So the key lessons that now you bring over to some of the portfolio companies in terms of growth scaling? We already spoke about how to project, that's fine. But as you actually deploy the strategy, what are some of those lessons?
Yeah, so many.
I know there's a lot. That's why.
How much time do we have? No, if I try and encapsulate it into some key things, I think the first thing I really learned was growth is not all about just growing revenue. It's about so much of it, and being in a CLO role was key for me. How do you actually manage the growth of the organization to support it? And there's plenty of examples of companies that just outgrew their ability to actually execute. And so definitely in an organization like DigitalOcean, which was highly complex, we had to think about infrastructure, DevOps, data, support, talent, organizational structure, culture, all these different components that all have individually the ability to implode a business if they're not executed correctly. And so probably the biggest piece that has the most immediate effect when you really start seeing that growth, one thing that we talked about a lot back in those days was a quote that I think came from Mark Andreessen, which was that software is eating the world. And also this whole concept that software eating the world was the driver for why people needed cloud. And then the concept that when you have product market fit, then it's, you're not trying to find growth, you're trying to keep up with it. You're just basically running as fast as you can to keep up with the growth because you have product market fit. And that's what we had. And so what do? You have to build quicker, you have to hire quicker, you have to do, a lot of things to build an organization that can support it. We, in the space of the second year I was there, so I joined in 2013, early 2013, and in 2014, we added 100 people to the organization, 80% of which were engineers, just in a completely flat, disorganized way. I will say that it was not my choice to do it that way. We had lots of battles about how to do it, but the ultimate, understanding was we need as much resource as we can, and different powers that be were kind of driving to say, let's just hire. We just need people at the table. And my biggest fears came true, which was you put a melee of people into basically a mosh pit and just say, go get stuff done. No one has direction. No one has a target. No one has motivation. There's no reference to who's the better engineer, who's the worst engineer, who's taking care of what. It all tries to self-organize. And the idea is, it's a utopian world. They're going to figure it out. But the reality is they don't. And there's two things that happen. One, because now you're in a situation where you have so many people that you cannot create a human connection with every one of them, culture gets lost. So whatever it was that was seeding the business and creating the magic begins to fade because you got just disappointed, unhappy people, and you're not able to really deliver culture. And what culture is designed to do is to optimize the performance of the team. And secondly, because there was no structure, the people who were true performers felt that they couldn't deliver. And because that makes them unhappy, they leave. And you're left with the people who are lower performers who aren't necessarily as good at delivering, so they're not as affected by lack of delivery. So it became really we got into this, what we would call a cultural crisis by the end of 2014. And we had an intervention of sorts in the very beginning of 2015 and said, this needs to all change. And so at that point, we totally restructured the organization, built layering and organization around the engineering teams, built management structures in there, brought in Matt Hoffman, who still works with me now at M13, to run talent and start building a culture program. And literally a year later, I think we were voted best place to work in New York, or one of those ratings. So we went from cultural, abyss to best place to work. And it was all very, very structured and planned. And, we totally changed our communication strategy. We created bi-weekly, what we called AMAs, which were Ask Me Anything, which the idea of it was, put the executives in front of the whole company and just answer whatever question they have, no matter how hard it is. And just being vulnerable and opening up just creates that bond, even though you've got a bigger organization. And so what I learned was that, the growing pains are the things that can kill, or at least at minimum, hold back your company. And so think about your head of talent hire early. Think about them as someone that's going to optimize the performance of your team, not just hire people or not just give people things that they like. It's how do I optimize for it? How do I hire the best people, onboard them as good as possible, and keep them so engaged and tied into the culture and the mission of the business that they are delivering at 110% every day. And that's the ultimate, talent leader. And most young entrepreneurs were like, oh, we're 30, 40 people. We don't need a talent leader now. We can grow double, triple before we need one. Or maybe we just hire a recruiter. We don't need a talent person. But ultimately, everybody that we've invested in that's hired a talent leader has come back 3-6 months later and said, that's the best hire we could have ever made, because it just increased its performance. And there's a handful of other roles and other structural things, like technical program managers is another thing that most people don't realize that they need. But I learned about all the little nuances in an organization that make an organization perform better. And I think that's probably the single greatest lesson that I learned in that whole.
Thanks for tuning in. If you found this valuable, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. And if you want to dive deeper into this conversation, check out the links in the description to watch the full episode. See you in the next one.